Hello, people. Here, Fanny Anzai interviews. I'm your host, Fanny Anzai, and today we have here again. I think it's our fourth meeting, Alex.
Third or fourth, yeah.
Yeah, with Alexander Adams. He's a British author and artist and critic in UK. You want to give me a little bit more of your to enrich a little bit more my introduction, please.
Yes, I'm an author, writer, poet, author of two books, something that we've discussed on the show before, Culture
Yeah.
War and Iconoclasm, both available from online booksellers. I also write a lot for different websites, including Bournbrookmag, Spiked, the Critic, and RT, which is the website of Russia Today. And I also write for various print journals as well.
That's right. And thank you very much for completing my my introduction. We have talked about the books before, so you guys check out the interviews I even shared on Freebird Media Canada. And I would like to cover a little bit more on the articles today, as you mentioned, the Brookborn and Spite. And of course, the subject here, it's all about freedom and versus COVID, this war we have been through the last 2 years so far, at least locked, lost our rights and freedoms slowly with lockdowns and mandates of masks and vaccines slowly going back and forward, but every time taking a little bit more of our freedoms. And I would like to just point out that you guys in UK have been in more of a victory for freedom and the lockdowns going down. But here in Canada, we're in the middle of the hurricane. So that's why we decided to sit together and mainly to talk about the iconoclasm, because it was an attempt of smearing the protest, the truck convoy here in Canada,
Yeah.
talking about how it was violent or defacing statues, which never happened. Um, and we wanted to put all this parallel and compare and talk a little bit about this. So, Alex, tell me a little bit of your experience there, because you guys are on the way getting out of the COVIDism, which I love the expression I learned from your books. And we're going to bring other expressions, like you talk about the COVIDians. And how is the experience? And right now you might be feeling relieved, but how can we fix this problem we're going through right now?
Well, the reason the situation in Britain is a little bit easier than in Canada, well, one of the main reasons is because of the political weakness of the leader. Although the party he's at the head of, he's head of the Conservative government, although his party is in quite a strong position, he is personally in quite a weak position. So although he's been following a lot of the advice, and it's come out that much of the advice he's got regarding lockdown and vaccine sort of treatments have come from a group of experts who have been sort of directed or steered towards giving worst case scenarios and extreme situations. He has largely followed that, but he's in such a weak position that he felt that he couldn't continue to keep with a strong lockdown and a move towards vaccine passports and so forth, and a vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. He felt like he couldn't push towards that because he was so unpopular, and there was a risk of him alienating the general public. The general public has been quite cooperative in Britain, but people are starting to lose interest. They're starting to lose faith in experts. They're starting to feel like they have done a lot. They have suffered a lot. They've sacrificed a lot, and they want to see an end to this, especially now as the most recent strain of COVID seems to be a lot weaker than the previous ones, and so people just want to get back to normal. And the Prime Minister has essentially kind of agreed. He's given this concession to them, and he's backed down. And a lot of the technocrats, the hard-eyed technocratic managers and the experts are rather disappointed about this. But it's essentially, that's why our situation is slightly better than yours, I think.
Thanks a lot. So yeah, I was planning on starting with the Bournbrookmag.com articles, but those are 3 or 4 articles, right? And you have one more recent one, Spiked, that I really liked the title, and I think is that's why so many people, and not just the truckers, are standing for freedom here. And maybe, like you said, you guys are in a better position speaking in political scenario, but still, I still believe that in the end, the core value of individuals, of people itself, is to defend freedom in the end. So the idea that the truckers convoy here would be, to try to smear as a white supremacist, nationalist, racist group with Confederate flags or Nazi flags, which there is no evidence more than a few planted things we could spot. They spotted right on the place, and it's not just offensive to us minorities that defend freedom, who came to Canada because we believe that Canada was a strong and freer country than the place we left, and also because we all want to have that freedom to make our individual choice. We don't want to. None of us, I think, in the end, want to live in a socialism where we're going to be told where who to pray or not, and how to treat our own bodies and what to do. Like that question of my body, my choice here is, I think, is again one thing that has been on the table for so long, and it's difficult to kind of close your eyes and try to justify with fear, which has been the one of the things you mentioned in your articles, how they can move masses, how they can actually move crowds and manipulate and use them in their favor. So we need the spiked article is, we need to recover our right to dissent, and I think that has been the most important thing. And to speak of how freedom is only when you have really the right to even say no to the vaccines, to the masks, and mainly after what we have been proved by data that they are not protective to justify the mandates at the
Yes.
first place.
So what happens is that when you agree to the principle of freedom of speech, this means not essentially your own speech, it means the speech of others, and especially those who disagree with you. So you have to understand that if you agree with this concept, that it's going to come back and you're going to get some criticism, you're going to get some opposition, you're going to get people speaking who you really don't agree with, and you'd rather they didn't say anything, although you wouldn't want to silence them. And I think that people who talk about freedom of speech sometimes forget this. I mean, often what you get is what I mentioned in my first book was I discussed the idea of Islamism, and a lot of people said, oh, well, the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists who made sort of derogatory cartoons about Mohammed, well, they had the freedom to use that that free speech, but they shouldn't have exercised it for the benefit of community cohesion. So in other words, they had freedom of speech, but they shouldn't been able to use it. Well, if you can't use it, then you don't have it. If you don't have the choices to use it or not use it, then you don't have access to that. And that's what I think about the point is that we should be allowed to dissent and to say that we prefer not to get a certain medical treatment, which may or may not be effective. We should be able to decide this on our own. We should be provided with clear information and make our own personal decision according to our health circumstances and our family circumstances and our work circumstances. And we should be allowed to dissent, because if it's taken away for this, then it will be taken away in future for other things that so maybe you agree that a vaccine mandate is important at the moment, but you see, well, for the next one, it might not be so important. But if you've already conceded that no one should have a choice, no one should be able to refuse, no one should be able to question publicly this stance, then what happens is when the next time comes up and you want to back that cause, well, you've already undermined yourself. So you must allow people to speak against what you believe in now in order for you to be able to speak against things that you disagree with in future.
Yeah, beautiful. In your article, you just talk about how free speech has been one of the chief casualties of the pandemic, and it's so true. We've experienced here in Canada and so many places this attack to free speech, because just trying to demonize who dissents from the group, calling them just these evil, selfish people that just don't take the vaccines, completely forgetting that I've taken a shot, for example, and I'm definitely not a type of the anti-vax, because I have been taking vaccines my entire life. I'm very skeptic about the efficiency and the future effects of the new mRNA treatments as an immunotherapy myself, but I would definitely indicate for all my older than 65 years old patients, or even younger, let's say in between 40 to 65, maybe the ones who have comorbidities, and younger people that have special conditions, but also remember, which I think is so annoying to me as a medical doctor, to have to point out so many times when people say it's just a question of choice, when there are so many medical conditions that impossibilize many people to take the vaccines, and those people would be a second class of citizens that if we don't go back to normal, they would be impeded of having normal lives because they don't have a choice. And this is another dark side of this movement of forcing people when not everybody can actually take, and not just to say that my body, my choice. Nobody should be forced to put anything into their bodies that they don't trust, they don't know.
Well, this is very important because, of course, a lot of the feminists, the strongest advocates of my body, my choice, the sort of the pro-abortion lobby, the people who, especially women, who believe that they should be able to have full control over their body and that there should be no legislators, especially male legislators, who should be able to tell them what they can and cannot do with their own body because their own body is their own property. And this is sort of the libertarian argument. But where are those feminists now? Because a lot of them went very quiet when the idea of vaccine mandates and sort of compulsory vaccination came in, that they were completely silent on the question of my body, my choice. It was less convenient for some reason. And it seems as though often this principle of my body, my choice is not really a principle. It's just an argumentational tactic used by one group because it seems to be effective. They don't actually believe in the principle, and they don't actually embody this in the way that they have accepted the vaccine, the jab mandates, or jab coercion, as it were. So I think that it's quite interesting that the feminists may not have been arguing from principle, but from convenience, I think.
For sure. And there is a part of the population that I pointed out this morning. I saw some posts on Twitter, and the lady is reposting someone talking about how she felt so bad taking the vaccine, how she got sick and almost died and scared a lot of her kids, but she wanted to know how to do that with the kids anyways, and not scare them so much because they were already scared, and she really wants them to take the jabs. And I was like, I actually watched the video. I think it was on the Fleck's the Week's videos. He makes like some cuts, and this lady is holding down this boy, and she has like a kind of enjoyment face while he is freaking and crying in pain and suffer while she swabs his nose for a rapid test, and she looked like she was enjoying. And I was like, man, this is crazy, that we are.
This situation seems to have enabled a certain degree of sadism on the part of ordinary people, and where they can sort of demand that you don't do things, that they prevent you from going out, they prevent you from meeting, they prevent you from going to work, you're not allowed to exercise, you're not allowed to leave the house at certain times, and this seems to have empowered people to be cruel and to be aggressive, especially, you know, with regards to masks and mask wearing. Of course, if you've read the Danish mask study, you'll know that the wearing of ordinary plastic or cloth masks in open spaces is essentially meaningless in the way that we do it, in the way that it's done casually, the way that masks are handled. They're not applied sterilized, they're reused, they're not fitted properly, and so forth and so forth. So there is some purpose to them in certain settings, especially sort of sterile settings where they're used in a very controlled manner, in sort of surgery, for example. But in open daily life, they're of no much use. But you'll find that there are a lot of people who have been empowered to be aggressive and interfering and disapproving, that they have been enabled to do this by the sort of the mask mandates and so forth. And it has brought out, I think, the worst in people. I have seen that quite a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because during all this time of COVID, not just this police mask behavior that raised on like so many people, but also like the free speech, in the sense people have the fear feel intimidated to speak out, and the free speech not being just attacked by that, but also, for example, here in Canada, we had Trudeau using the COVID lockdowns and manipulating politics to call an early election. And we have in the mainstream media and the government together, which we see clearly every day, we
Yeah,
saw
we have the same thing here. Yeah.
We saw happening what? Poisoning the well on a third option, which would be the PPC, which is a libertarian party that is like the option for left and right, for everybody who is left and right and does not agree with authoritarian measures. But they did what? Mainstream media, government, oh, those are white supremacists, and start smearing them with completely empty,
even if the
false
people themselves aren't
accusations.
actually white. Yeah.
You know, and we saw the same behavior against the Freedom Convoy, saying that, trying to smear them, saying that you know. So it is right now we feel like it's I guess many people feel impotent of what to do.
Yes.
Before a scenario of like people were manipulating, and mainstream media and government are together to stop. For example, you might have seen the GoFundMe got.
Yeah. Well,
I'll
say a couple of words about the media before we
Yeah.
get to the truckers. So yeah, we've also seen in Britain, the BBC has acted as basically an arm of the government, being very uncritical. Whenever there was any sort of announcement, it was covered completely in an uncritical way. There were no difficult questions, even some basic questions about some of the data being presented. A lot of the data was out of date. Sometimes they would always produce the worst case scenario, and this was not questioned. And there was always a sense whenever a question came up, especially from the BBC or Sky or Channel 4, that the main broadcasters, essentially, they will say, well, why aren't you locking down harder? Why didn't you do this earlier? Why didn't you go further? Why aren't the restrictions tougher? There was only questioning in one way, and this made it sort of clear to the general public that there was only one acceptable form for sort of polite and educated people to go, and that was towards the hard lockdown route, the mandate route, the vaccine passport route, and this entirely skewed the debate. And also, something that we'd noticed was also the fact that the government was paying a lot of money for adverts on television and in newspapers, specifically warning about basically fear porn. It's basically propaganda, warning about the dangers of COVID, you know, even for relatively sort of healthy people and so forth, and, you know, saying that everyone is at risk and everyone has the danger of dying. Well, no, for healthy people, the risk is very low indeed. But this obviously, this money was going into newspapers and it was going into broadcasting, and this was clearly altering the way editors were thinking and acting. So this was an added incentive for the mainstream media not to question the narrative, not to put alternative views, not to speak about the suffering that lockdown was causing. So yeah, obviously the mass media has acted in that way, and also social media by framing that stuff with, you know, YouTube and Facebook and Twitter with warnings, you know, information links, etc., to official sites. They've clearly joined the alliance as well.
Yeah, it gives people should give a check on like kind of like your oldest article about this right now, which would be from December 14th in the Bournbrookmag, was the COVID-19 a conscious objector.
Conscientious objector, yes.
Objector's view, yeah. And where you talk, and I actually wrote down, because I really like this sentence you used there, is the government and authorities make clear to us whether you are our servants or whether you think you are our masters. And I think that is one of the points I kept pointing out, because every time we bring libertarianism, is the government there to really, you know, rule our lives, or to just protect us when we need? It's like a referee is not supposed to stop the game if everything is going well.
It's starting to micromanage everything. And also, I mean, I think a problem for libertarians is, I mean, I'm largely in sympathy with a lot of libertarian points,
Yeah.
but the libertarians have been extremely weak on private business. They say, of course, you know, private business can act as they want, but of course, private business is getting huge subsidies from the government. And then, of course, the government comes calling to them and says, oh, we'd rather you remove Joe Rogan, or we'd rather you remove this person, or we'd rather you didn't platform that person, or we'd like this channel closed.
Yeah,
This is misinformation.
I don't think the world yet is there good enough to receive the libertarian method all around, because we don't really have a free market capitalism. Just like you mentioned, we have governments and business and mainstream media connected. And I think the main problem is the corporatism, to have the government, to have big government and politicians together. Sometimes it's the same person who's contracting from his private company. And this is something that should never happen. But we have lobbyists, we have all those crooked, you know, political, economical scams happening right now, and they call it free market. It sounds like we're just like, no, it's not never happened a true socialism, which would be the fallacy of many socialists try to point out, or communists try to point out. But in fact, we really don't have a free market capitalism.
No, what we have is corporatism. So the largest corporations, they're working hand in hand with the government. They're essentially doing a lot in terms of writing legislation, presenting legislation to politicians. Politicians are not experts. They're busy sort of worrying about their next election. They're trying to recover from a scandal. They're trying to keep something secret. They're trying to make a little bit of money. They're only going to be in this field for 10 years, 12 years, maybe.
A lot of the vaccine mandates and the faulty emails, connections, and NIH and everything, so connected. Like this, I think, is that part of the bad dark scheme on the government that is not exposed, and is not exposed by the mainstream media, because they also have no interest. They gain from that, which happens here on the CTV, which Trudeau has bragged about. We have pointed that out, like try to, you know, spread the news of like, look at him talking about how the mainstream media would never talk shit about him, because he gives millions, trillions of dollars to them. And people just, oh, it's not anything bad to do that, or they don't see that as even a confession of how they are connected and bad together.
So you have direct, you have political connections, you have the financial connection. You also have an attitude, which I've talked about, like the managerial elite, the technocratic elite. which comes up a lot in my articles. And that's essentially that these people, the politicians, the heads of businesses, the top of the civil service, top scientists, they all form what I call a technocratic elite or a managerial elite, which was described by James Burnham in the 1940s and 50s. And he saw ahead quite effectively that these people are working together in order to become overall managers. So what they're doing is they're reducing capitalism, because their capitalism is unstable, it's competitive. You have sudden entrepreneurs, you have new ideas suddenly overturning whole sort of business systems or economic systems. You have innovation, which is dangerous, which can destabilize. You have new people entering the market. You have the possibility of established figures losing their fortunes and so forth. So what you want to do is you want to suppress capitalism and increase corporatism, associate corporatism with the government and with media and so forth, and you form this sort of crust which is immovable, and you don't have much possibility of disruption from sort of dangerous capitalists. But this instills a paternalistic outlook. So I would say the third reason or fourth reason that the media don't expose any of this or ask critical questions, or even sort of platform experts who have reasonable doubts about sort of vaccine mandates or the use of lockdown as a tool to suppress virus. There is a shared paternalism in that they all have the same outlook. They all went to the same universities. They all read the same newspaper. They all vote for the same parties. They all have the same values. They're all pretty much atheists as well. Interestingly, they believe in technology. They believe in science. They are part of the cult of Scientism, and they believe that enough control and enough information, if they can apply that, they can solve any problem. And this builds up into a sort of a paternalistic attitude, and that's why you have something like in Britain, you have the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, which acts as a sort of like, they want to be the arbiters of truth. They want to be your moral guardians. They want to be your vicar. They want to be your scientist. They want to be your teacher, and they will control everything. And they will just sort of brush away any inconvenient questions or doubts. So I think that's another reason why the mass media acts as it does.
Yeah. I would like to point out that those articles, the January 4th COVID and mass formation psychosis, part 1, just made me think right away about Scott Adams and Douglas Murray with talking about the mass formation psychosis, which I have heard from them before. And I saw from comments people pointing out other specialists that talk about this specific subject. But it is interesting because you point out now that the crowds can be created, they can be used. So I think I've mentioned that in other videos before with so many people speaking about atheism and secularism, more in the sense that people they are in need to follow. If it's not religious groups, if they are, like you mentioned, they become atheists of not following a religious church group or whatever, then they will pick on other types of beliefs. And now scientism, which became a very popular top term here, I hear other people using against science. I've met flat earth that's like, oh, you are a scientist because you believe blindly in science. That's the way the other people were using to try to call me a type of like that I'm into scientist. But I think it's an interesting thing because people just want to follow. So it seems to be easy as feminism or any other group of activism, social or eco or whatever, and you point that out in your articles. It's so easy. It's so attractive. And
it's true that I think there is a natural desire to form into groups, to form bonds, to have shared values and to act together. It's exciting to be part of a crowd. If you've been to a concert, it's great to sort of clap in unison or to cheer or, to sing a song along with the performer. And there's a natural desire to act as a group and to be seen to be acting as a group. And this is one of the problems, is that once you form your mass group, your mass body, of course you sort of direct them. There's an out group, there's shared values, there are certain actions. The rules no longer apply to you. There is more leeway for violence, for intolerance, for extremism, and this is permitted to a degree by the leaders. And so it's directed against those against heretics, as it were. So this was done in religious times, but this is not necessarily a religious situation. This is a mass psychological situation. It's mass psychosis.
Yeah, and it's really good because and what I think is the important part, which I would give more focus on what our conversation is, more to give answers for all of us to try to not just blindly follow the government, or not also blindly follow any other group just because it's anti-government. How to avoid this group thinking, this mentality.
Yes, we could just
mentality.
react in the reverse way and just say all vaccines are terrible. Of course, no, not all vaccines are terrible. Some are more effective than others. Some are more necessary than others. Yeah, obviously, I mean, I'm not opposed to vaccines in principle, but obviously you should. Well,
I think what is important to say at this moment is that the science is not authoritarian. So I think which you point out quite well is that the COVIDism and the Scientism have that methodology. They try to make a Puritan environment where if you dissent, you're bad, you're evil, you just don't have good intentions, you have to be cut out of the group, and everybody has to think the same and believe the same, and it cannot be contested. And we know that the the scientific method, it's not based in any type of authoritarianism. Much more in the opposite way. It's trying to disprove itself and not or not destroy, delete, and cancel everybody that confronts the hypothesis.
Yeah. So what should be a question of evidence, evidence and cost, because obviously every action has a cost. How you prepare for something. There's a cost involved in that. So you have to obviously evaluate. Sadly, you have to evaluate the importance of a life compared to the cost, because of course this cost is removing resources from other people, from other conditions, from other actions, and so forth. So you have to make a decision about a trade-off about how safe you want to make people and what cost you're prepared to pay for that. So of course you could cut down the number of traffic accidents to zero if you just banned cars, but of course that's not practical. You could reduce car crashes if you reduce the overall speed limit much lower. But then, of course, you're going to have lots of congestion. You're going to use up lots of resources. Everything's going to become a lot slower. Travel's going to become more difficult. So every time you do something in order to make people safer, there will be a cost, and there needs to be a discussion about that. But instead of having a discussion, what happens is, with COVIDianism, what you have is it becomes a moral question. So anyone who is opposed to the authorities, who are taking a hard line in terms of treatments, in terms of lockdowns, in terms of masks, anyone who opposes them is misinformed, they are malicious, they're spreading misinformation, they're mischievous, they are morally dubious, they are actually evil. And so the problem is, now that you cannot have a rational discussion about the costs and the problems of a situation, you cannot evaluate the evidence, because one side is automatically considered too extreme, is considered unacceptable. So there is no debate, there can be no discussion.
And we are still experiencing this censorship and cancel culture, shadow banning, which we've been throughout these years talking about. It happens, it doesn't, it's that architected, it's is organized or not. Maybe we're just not that good, something like that. But now seems to be clearly every day more that it happens in some way, that there are those words you're not supposed to use, there's those subjects you're not supposed to talk about. And in the same article, it's interesting because it was from January 4th. We were talking about the episode of Joe Rogan in Spotify, not Spotify, but now the the entire debate about the Spotify, the leading in episodes, and other people trying to cancel Joe Rogan on Spotify. The episode of Dr. Robert Malone, which is virologist, specialist, medical doctor, creator of the mRNA vaccines, and
Yeah, yeah.
speaking of the skepticism of mass vaccinating people during a pandemic, or even how safe would be to really use in this level of just vaccinate everybody. And and we experience now, right now, what is going to happen with Joe Rogan X and his episodes, and this type of what we can talk about or not, which it's quite mind-blowing, to us to
Yeah.
think it 2022 and we're talking about censorship in that level.
Well, the thing is that also this is just the latest front, because the Joe Rogan has been a target for people, especially people on the left, particularly authoritarian types, and authority establishment figures, because of course he has sort of had open debates, sort of with all sorts of people from a variety of backgrounds and opinions. So he's hosted some people who are considered on the right wing, people who are considered sort of cranks or eccentrics or purveyors of poor information, and this I think is undoubtedly the case, but not necessarily on the issues of COVID and so forth. I think the biggest so there is obviously there was that sort of internal debate. There was a rebellion inside Spotify where there were lots of people workers inside Spotify who didn't want to have him on because he was seen as too friendly towards the right wing. And this is just another front and another attempt to try and cancel him, to remove him. But yeah, so it's kind of, it's just the latest incarnation of something that existed already before the COVID outbreak. And I think the COVID situation is being used to advance all sorts of people's different agendas, not necessarily relating to something that they've particularly said on COVID, which is wrong, but rather that this is this is a good avenue of attack for anyone who's ever been like a dissident, because a lot of dissidents have said, no, we can see what you're doing with the lockdown, we can see what you're doing with the biometric passports, we can see what you're doing about reducing access to cash, and instead, suggesting replacing it with an electronic transactions only, which of course is much easier for the government to track and so forth. And when the dissidents say this, of course, this makes them just another target. That makes them a target again when they were targets already. So.
For sure, we see quite a lot of that, the COVIDianism and the frighten the crowd, which is the part 3, and is demonizing its opponents. You published this on January 7th. And is this self-abnegation probably what makes most of people feel like they are giving away and you should do it too? Is that the...
Yes, so the self-abnegation is basically where you're saying you're giving up your individual autonomy in order to be part of this group. As I said, like when you go to a concert, when you go to a sporting event, you are voluntarily, or when you're doing a collective act of worship or something, you are voluntarily giving up something of yourself in order to become part of the crowd. And this enables you to do things that you would not normally do. You're braver, you're more reckless, you're willing to put your life on the line, you're more willing to suspend your judgment, and so forth. And this happens all the time. And once this has been done, I think it's something that's not going to go away. It's something that's sort of hardwired into humanity. And unfortunately, I think what's happened with especially with compliance over lockdown and so forth, because people have essentially followed rules or regulations or strong recommendations on the basis of those only, because they've not necessarily encountered firsthand the dangers of COVID. I mean, it is potentially a dangerous illness for some people, but the mass of people have followed this, and this is because I think it is largely the case that it is part of being welded into a society, and society demands that a lot of people follow rules, even though they don't necessarily apply to them and they don't necessarily work especially well for those individuals. But for the society as a whole, it needs those rules, it needs that compliance. So I think one of the difficulties is that it's shown how compliant people are overall. And I know you've spoken about defending liberty, and most of us want free speech, and most of us want freedom of association and so forth. But I think that what we've seen during this during the reaction to lockdown and so forth is mass compliance. It's a lot of people giving up their freedom. It's a lot of people accepting censorship. It's a lot of people saying, okay, well, I don't have the freedom to associate. I don't have the freedom to go and visit my relatives because they're over the state line or they haven't been vaccinated or whatever. And a lot of people following this, and this is a little bit alarming and a little bit depressing for liberals, for true liberals and for true libertarians, because they're seeing people around them acting in a collective way under an authoritarian regime, and not defending liberty and not standing up for freedom and not standing up for individual rights. I think a lot of libertarians will have to look at this quite hard and think about if their model of human behavior is accurate.
I think it's a good question, and I think it's something that always comes back for us when they're talking to people, when they point out if it's more religious people that are opposing the lockdowns, or if it's more atheist people. And I still point out, like, I think it's because our brains, as what we've been trained as society, is that we've been trained to follow religious movements or ritualistic groups, or something for a greater good, to give you a purpose of sacrifice, self-sacrifice. So the idea of, like, maybe being feminists or vegans or anti-guns or anti-abortion, or something. People have that easy way to become like the whatever police masks, COVID police masks, or anti-mandates, whatever side. The idea is, like, how can you actually fight that mob mentality and try to have principles of freedom? Because I think nobody wants to be told how to live their lives in the end, even if you want mask or not.
Well, you'd hope so, but I mean, we've got a lot of evidence that people will do that. They will voluntarily cut themselves off from family members. They will leave their work. They will get a medical treatment that they don't know the outcome for, and that maybe is unnecessary for them.
I think most of people are convinced by what you mentioned, like the fear mongering, because, like, you don't want to die. You don't want your family to die. You don't want to kill other people's families. You don't want to kill grandmas. By the way, my grandma actually died 2 days ago of COVID, but she had a lot of comorbidities and a very weak heart. So very she was 85 with heart problems. And my thoughts are always that, and she was vaccinated, by the way, of course, but my thoughts are always, even when it comes to resource, maybe we should not be forcing vaccinating everybody and give those vulnerable people more shots, and maybe she should not have 2-3 shots. She should have, like, every 2 months shot. And the idea that we are forcing, that we're taking so much energy, money, efforts, political, it forces to force people to do things instead of just let them do by assessing their own risk, is, for me, a no, we should never cross. And most of people should stand just with the truckers for freedom.
Yeah, well, obviously, but this is not entirely to do with illness. This is to do with social credit, establishing a social credit system, which has been the aim of governments and NGOs and charities and millionaires and
Well,
billionaires
and
for a
how
long time.
hard, and it is hard because we realize that if they have all if they have all the resource of and all the source of like telling people, they have the eyeballs, they have the mainstream media with them to fear, to spread the fear. In your old, I think it's the ultimate article. Is the from the group of the part 3 is the deprogramming convenience and mass psychosis, which I love what all the topics you point out. We're probably not going to be able to go over everything, so guys, go check out the articles. But for me, it's how can we actually make to deprogram the others, the ones that are consuming this propaganda, this mass, you call mass media messaging, which is spreading this fear message, this message of fear, and convincing people to live this way because this is real. I know, not because I go out, the people that I actually deal with go out are mostly free, or free like us, or not woke, they're awake. So but my husband works with a group of people that completely just consume mainstream media, and for them, the truckers there, and we talk about people that we deal with, like they believe the truckers, the convoy truckers, are white supremacists, nationalists, evil people that don't care about people. They could just wear masks and take their shot. That's all.
Well,
How can we
yes.
help people to not be just convinced by the media?
Well, I would say, first of all, I would say that I do. I mean, I have very positive feelings about the Ottawa truckers. I think that it's a great demonstration of what many ordinary Canadians are feeling, that they just simply have had enough. They don't want any more restrictions. They've done their part. And that it's unreasonable to force people to have medical treatments in order to keep their jobs, especially if these jobs are not health related. I mean, there was a certain degree of debate over whether nurses should automatically have this, but personally,
Yeah,
I think that no. But I mean, that's a reasonable discussion to have, even if,
definitely. I agree
yeah,
with you.
with truckers, I
Considering that
mean, relatively little.
they would have to accept the natural immunity as well, which was not
Yes,
acceptable ever, and that's
yeah,
why we keep opposing the mandates. I think the Freedom Convoy, I understand that there are some people that might be there just because they hate Trudeau, okay, and maybe they want to be in his position. That's
yeah,
fine, but I think what congregates us there is the freedom of choice, the freedom of choice of assessment of your individual risks and your body, what you're going to
yeah.
put into your body. And we are all against, like, no more mandates. We don't want mass mandates or vax mandates, because we understand that the business are only forcing people because they are being forced by the government.
Yes, I would urge people to go and see. There's an interview with one of the trucker leaders or representatives called Benjamin Dichter. You can find an interview with him on YouTube and other video platforms with on the Matt Christiansen channel. On the 6th of February, they did an interview with Benjamin Dichter, and he talked about the aims and the goals of the truckers, and he was very reasonable. He's not an extremist, he's not a political man, and he talked about the way they'd
Matt is really reasonable. They're like really great people, for sure.
yeah,
I have interviewed Matt, and for sure it's I saw him talking about the Freedom Convoy, one of the people who covered, and for sure he has great points and can
yeah,
explain in a far from straw manning, which has happened way too many times now
yeah.
recently by mainstream media and government, calling the movement violent or anyway. By the way, I've been this weekend. 2 days ago, I mentioned I received the call. I was in the protest in Vancouver when I received the call from my mom
Oh,
telling my grandma died
oh,
of COVID. And of course, the fight is still there. Old people, people vulnerable should get the vaccine, should have a little bit more, should be a little bit more careful about getting COVID. But healthy people need to stand out for freedom and go out there, and no more mandates. No, and for sure, more than that, we didn't point out to protect our children, because I'm not even doing this for me. I'm willing to take the shot. I have taken one, and I'm actually not willing to take a second one because I got really sick from the first. But I don't want to do that with my daughter, and I want to defend the right of not even me would be like, I will not put something in her body that is not completely safe. And the one thing we can say right now is that we're not completely sure about the safety, and we're pretty sure that it's not that efficient. So
and also we also know that children are at a very, very low risk of dying of COVID.
And they have higher risk of having myocarditis from the vaccines than to having complications from the COVID. So that is a very important data to put us on a no for the vaccinating under 19 years old.
And so I would say that that there are very many good reasons not to mandate vaccines or any medical treatment. It should be voluntary. People should be given the information and reasonable information, and they should be able to make their own judgment from that. And I think that what's happening with the Freedom Convoy is essentially people saying, we would like to have back the freedoms that we had, which were my body, my choice, well, to a degree, and that this is a principle worth fighting for. And also it's important to combat government overreach and safetyism, which I discuss in the book Iconoclasm. So safetyism is the culture of always going to protecting first, and working on a precautionary principle where you're always trying to protect someone or always trying to prevent the most harm. But as I said, this is a trade-off, so it's not necessarily an intelligent or useful or even an effective way of protecting people. And it's also closely associated with stuff like the social credit system, electronic banking, UBI, which of course would allow the government to sort of basically control your income. You would be working for the government rather than the government helping you. Rather than a safety net, it becomes like a network, a spider's web that keeps you trapped in this dependency culture. Something that's quite alarming. So this obviously links up with things like monitoring on social media, monitoring your travel. This also relates, unfortunately, to something like eco-alarmism, and you see, for example, the push for electric vehicles. Well, electric vehicles in principle sound okay, but they use a lot of resources. They've got a large carbon footprint. You end up with lithium batteries. Lithium is quite a sort of toxic, dangerous element. Mining it is also expensive, and a lot of this is done in China and so forth. And the problem is that, of course, if you switch over to electric vehicles, what you're doing is a lot of people won't be able to afford them, so they'll be renting them. And this comes with
because
carbon credits for individuals.
No, but it is a good. I would love that we had more time. I have to let you go, but we were talking about this. I think everything falls in the discussion. Every time we find a problem when it comes to economics and politics, is because the politics are trying to control economics. When it comes to, for example, those incentives, it would be natural that we will transition to electrical power in vehicles. But I think right now it has a lot of like this political influences trying to force people to transition before they would. And that might be one of the problems, that those artificial forces put by political agents trying to manipulate how people should live, how the economy should be going, is what caused most of the problems that we experience. Of course, I would love to point out, check out the articles, because you point out the hypocrisy of the elites, which we can see all over the COVID, as well how the injustice of the authoritarian measures have been pretty much ignored, and much more deaths and harm caused than benefits from all the authoritarian measures, which is points that I guess any individual as humans, if we're all caring really for not letting people die, not as even if we're all gonna die, we're trying to stop that and do our best, should be points that should be seen. And in the iconoclasm, you have a great like it's so dense, so many examples to point out. One of the things I mentioned, how they try to smear the Freedom Convoy,
Yeah,
talk
we should
about
mention that, yes.
defacing images, statues in Canada, which didn't happen. They dress it up, put the Canadian flag upside down. And while we had so many media, government, mainstream media talk about peaceful protests that defaced innumerous images, statues in the United States and Britain, many places. Even in Canada, we had the statues defaced during Black Lives Matter and Antifa protests, and this didn't happen. The Freedom Convoy. And I wanted you to talk just a little bit about this before you go, because it's a point it's a remarkable point that how they are manipulating the opinion, the mass opinion.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. I mean, I did see the way that the Canadian media and the government smeared the truckers with sort of the idea that they defaced this statue. They hadn't defaced it. They put on a placard and they put on the flag upside down, and this was not. And this was not meant as disrespect to him. They were just saying that, you know, sort of the veterans, that heroes, that people who had fought to make Canada what it is today, which is it's obviously got a double side to it now, obviously, that they would support freedom. They would support the rights of Canadians to make decisions about their health and about their working conditions and about the futures for their family, and especially their children and maybe elderly relatives. And so it's important for them to express these things clearly. And then, of course, the criticism that they were sort of committing acts of violence against cultural heritage, of course, is absurd, because we all remember what that Trudeau and so many of the sort of the left liberals and authorities supported the church burning related to the supposed mass grave of First Nations people, which was not proved. A lot of these people apparently died of tuberculosis, which was endemic amongst the white settler community as well. It was absolutely endemic. You find a lot of people who emigrated from Scandinavian countries. One of the reasons they emigrated from Scandinavia was because of tuberculosis. This was a common problem as deficiency disease, essentially. And the burning of churches that happened in Canada over the summer of, was it 2021, was tacitly endorsed as some sort of payback for colonialism, for religious intolerance, for religious schools and institutions treating First Nations people badly. Well, obviously there is sort of there's a mixed picture on this, but this seems to be a deliberate act by the government to support iconoclasm when they find it useful. Then, of course, they use this accusation against people they don't like, such as the truckers. And this is something that I discuss in my book, Iconoclasm, the way that the elites use iconoclasm when they need it to force through their values or to demolish traditions or to demean groups. So it's used politically by the governing elite.
Yeah, and you guys need to go check out the books and the articles, everything. Very dense, very amazing. It's a pleasure always to read and talk to you, Alex. Thank you so much. People, go check, support. Alex, you want to leave a message and how people can support you and where they can find you again?
Well, thank you very much, Fanny. It's great to be back with you again. Yes, people can find my writing online at Bournbrook Magazine, Spiked, RT. You can buy these two books, which are available now on all book-selling websites and individual shops. My third book, called Artivism, is coming out in August. And yeah, maybe I hope I'll be chatting to Fanny about that. Otherwise, you can follow me. I'm occasionally appear on the Ferro Art channel. So if you look up Ferro, Ferro, you can find videos there where I talk about art. So that's a slightly less political show if you want to see what I do outside of politics.
Thank you very much. And let's finish the recording here and see you guys later today. I have another interview, and it's all about Freedom Convoy with Black Pigeon Speaks, Felix Rags, which is Canadian, not in Canada anymore, but lots of opinions on the same subject. So see you guys next, and let's stop here. See you. Bye.